If you had any respect for your mother, you'd hand over that dusty warehouse to me and stop clinging to your dead father's leftovers." He threw that sentence in my face in our living room, right in front of my mom. 2 years later, his face turned completely white when he finally learned. As always, before we dive into a story with an ending that's going to feel really satisfying for you, let's do a quick roll call. Type present and the city you're watching from in the comments. For everyone who has liked and subscribed, I pray that Allah makes your problems easier, widens your provision, and keeps your body healthy. Thank you, my friends. Now, listen carefully to my story. My name is Natalie, and for as long as I can remember, my dad's warehouse smelled like dust, motor oil, and old cardboard. He used to joke that it was his second home, and when I was little, he'd sit me on a pile of shrink-wrapped boxes and tell me that one day I'd understand the value of what we keep safe. Back then I thought he was just talking about the pallets of imported appliances and furniture he stored there for his small logistics business. I had no idea that he was also talking about secrets, documents, and the kind of evidence that can destroy people who look polite on the outside. Growing up, my mom, Diane, was the softer one. She worked part-time at a local boutique and always smelled like fabric softener and perfume testers. My dad, Paul, was the steady center of our house, the one who fixed the sink, paid the bills, and locked up the warehouse each night after checking everything twice. He wasn't perfect, but I never once saw him walk away from a responsibility. So when his heart suddenly stopped one rainy evening on the way back from the warehouse, it felt like the ground under us just opened and swallowed everything that felt safe. The months after his funeral blurred together. Neighbors brought casseroles, my mom cried herself to sleep, and collection letters started appearing in our mailbox more often than birthday cards. Even though Dad had left some savings and the warehouse inventory, the business couldn't run itself, and my mom didn't know how to manage suppliers and shipping schedules. I was still in my early 20s, working part-time at a cafe, and I tried to help by answering emails and calling Dad's old clients, but most of them slowly moved on. Each time I went to the warehouse, I felt this strange mix of grief and comfort, like Dad was still there in the creaking shelves and the old leather chair in his office. That's the world I was living in when my mom met Leonard. He appeared almost a year after my dad passed, like some kind of answer to a desperate prayer. At least, that's how my mom described him the first time she brought him home for dinner. He was tall, well-dressed, with this neat salt and pepper haircut and a voice that sounded like he'd spent his whole life talking people into things. "I work in asset management," he said, smiling over the roasted chicken my mom had made, like that explained everything and nothing at the same time. At first, I tried to be polite. Grief is strange, and I told myself my mom deserved some happiness, or at least someone to keep her company. Leonard complimented her cooking, laughed a little too loudly at his own jokes, and asked me generic questions about work and school. But there was this moment later that night, when my mom went to make tea, and it was just him and me at the table. His eyes shifted, just for a second, to the drawer where my dad used to keep the warehouse keys. "You know," he said casually, "it must be really tough trying to handle that old place on your own." I remember my shoulders tensing up. "It's fine," I said. "I'm not really handling it. I'm just making sure everything stays safe." "Safe," he repeated, almost tasting the word. "Safety costs money, Natalie. Property taxes, utilities, security. Your mother must be under a lot of pressure." He said it in that calm, thoughtful tone that makes people think you're being kind, but all I heard was, "What's in it, and how can I get my hands on it?" That was the first moment my stomach did that twist it only did when something wasn't right. Over the next few weeks, Leonard's name popped up more and more. He started picking my mom up from work, dropping by with takeout, and helping her sort through Dad's papers in the living room. I'd walk in and see him sitting where my dad used to sit, glasses on, flipping through old folders as if he'd always belonged there. Every time I asked what they were doing, my mom would say, "Leonard's just helping me understand our finances," with this grateful look in her eyes that made me feel like an intruder for even questioning it. The second red flag was when I came home one afternoon and found the warehouse keys missing from the usual drawer. "Mom, have you seen the keys to the warehouse?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, Leonard has them, she answered from the kitchen sink. He said he wanted to check on the place, see if it's still worth maintaining. He went there alone? I asked, feeling the heat rise in my face. She turned, a little defensive. Natalie, please. You've barely managed to step inside that place since your dad died. Leonard is trying to help us. Maybe he can figure out what to do with it. That night, I lay awake long after the house went quiet, imagining this near stranger walking through my dad's office, touching his things, opening drawers he had never earned the right to open. That was the beginning of the new world I was forced to live in. A house where my dad's name was said less and less, and Leonard's suggestions started sounding like decisions. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew that the one place my dad had always guarded the most, his warehouse, was exactly where someone like Leonard would want to dig first. I also knew something else, something I didn't tell my mother back then. My dad hadn't just left behind boxes of merchandise. He'd left something locked away that would one day decide who was really in control of our lives. The first clear explosion happened over dinner, of course. It always sounds small from the outside. Just a meal, a table, some food. But that night, everything on the table tasted like humiliation. Mom had cooked lasagna, Leonard had brought a bottle of wine, and his daughter Jenna came along for the first time. Jenna was a few years older than me, with glossy hair, perfect nails, and the kind of bored, superior look that made you feel like she'd already judged your entire life in 5 seconds. She walked around our living room, glancing at the family photos, and I saw her eyes linger on the picture of my dad holding me as a baby. "That's Paul," Mom said softly, noticing her look. "My late husband." Jenna gave a tight smile. "Right. Leonard told me. This house is cozy." We sat down, and at first, it was all polite small talk. Jenna talked about the city she lived in, her marketing job, the amazing rooftop bar near her apartment. Leonard asked my mom about work, asked me about the cafe, as if he genuinely cared. Then casually he looked up from his plate and said, "So Natalie, how is that warehouse doing? Still just sitting there doing nothing?" I put my fork down slowly. "It's not doing nothing," I said. "It's Dad's. It was Dad's. I'm just not ready to start selling off his things like they're junk." Jenna let out this small laugh, like a little puff of air. "You're still hung up on that place? It's just a bunch of dusty boxes, right?" My mom shifted uncomfortably. "Jenna," she murmured, but she didn't actually correct her. Leonard wiped his mouth with his napkin, leaning back in his chair like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "I understand sentiment, Natalie," he said. "I really do. But your mother is trying to move forward. Keeping an unused warehouse like that is irresponsible. It's money locked in concrete and steel." "It's not your decision," I said, my voice shaking. "You've known us for what, a few months? Dad trusted me with that place more than he trusted anyone. He always took me there." "That's exactly the problem," he replied smoothly. "He filled your head with emotional nonsense instead of teaching you how assets work." Something inside me cracked. "So you're saying my dad was irresponsible? He built that business from nothing," I shot back. "Natalie," my mom hissed under her breath, eyes filled with embarrassment. "Don't talk like that." Leonard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm saying you're a young woman without a real direction who's clinging to a dead man's warehouse instead of thinking about your mother's future." Jenna chimed in, swirling her wine. "Honestly, if my dad left something like that behind, I'd sell it and buy a condo. But maybe that's just me being practical." Laughter slipped out of her like she'd said something clever. The worst part was seeing my mom's face. Tired, confused, torn between me and the man who was now helping her sleep at night by promising stability. "I'm trying my best," I said quietly. "I go there, I check on it. I keep the lights paid. I need time." Leonard set his fork down with a quiet click that somehow thundered in my ears. Time doesn't pay property taxes, he said. If you had any respect for your mother, you'd hand over that dusty warehouse to me and stop clinging to your dead father's leftovers. My chest went cold. My mom flinched, but she didn't tell him to stop. She just looked at me with this pleading expression, like please don't make a scene, just let him help. I couldn't even swallow the food in my mouth. I'm not handing anything over to you, I managed. This isn't about respect, Leonard. This is about you wanting control over something that doesn't belong to you. Listen to how ungrateful you sound, he said, shaking his head. I'm trying to help this family. You're the one standing in the way. And just like that, in front of a man who wasn't there when we buried my father and his polished, perfect daughter, my role in that house shifted from daughter to problem. That night, after everyone went home, I heard Leonard talking softly with my mom in the kitchen. She's still grieving, my mom whispered. She's manipulating you with that grief, Leonard replied. If we don't take charge, she'll drag you down with her. I stood there in the hallway, hands shaking, thinking, if this is how he talks about me now, what will he say when he wants more than just the keys? I didn't know it yet, but the warehouse was about to turn from a memory into a battleground. From that dinner on, everything that had felt slightly off started to turn sharp. Leonard stopped pretending that he saw me as anything other than an obstacle in his path. He began with little things. The next morning, the household budget talk happened without me. I came home from work and found spreadsheets spread across the dining table, my mom sitting with a pen in her hand, looking like she'd just been scolded. Leonard stood over her, explaining interest rates and expenses like a teacher who'd already given up on his student. Where do I fit in here? I asked, putting my bag down. Leonard glanced at me. You don't, really. Your income barely makes a dent, Natalie. This is about your mother's responsibilities. My mom gave a weak smile. He's just helping us, honey. I was never good with numbers. It's nice to have someone who understands these things. The word us suddenly felt wrong, like it included him more than it included me. A few days later, I went to the warehouse for the first time since Leonard had visited it alone. The big metal door groaned as I unlocked it, the way it always had. Inside, everything looked mostly the same: rows of shelves, stacked boxes, dust motes floating in the strips of sunlight that came through the high windows. But when I walked into my dad's office, I noticed one thing out of place. The small safe behind his old framed photo had been shifted, just slightly, like someone had tried to move it and then put it back. My heartbeat started racing. Dad had told me about that safe when I was still a teenager, the day he let me watch him reset the code. Just in case something ever happens to me, he'd said. You should know where things are. Back then, I'd thought he meant things like spare keys and backup checks. Now, I wasn't so sure. I knelt in front of the safe, my fingers trembling as I typed in the code I'd never forgotten. His birthday, my birthday, and the number of years he'd been married to my mom. The lock clicked open with a sound that made my throat tighten. Inside, there was a small metal box with my name written on it in his handwriting, and a thick envelope sealed with a piece of red tape. For a moment, I just stared. The office suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier, like the walls were leaning in to listen. I reached for the envelope first. On the front, in neat, deliberate letters, it said, "For Natalie. To be opened only when you are ready to protect yourself and your mother." My eyes stung. I sat down in his old chair, the leather cracking slightly under my weight, and carefully opened the envelope along the seam. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in his clear, slightly slanted handwriting, and a stack of documents clipped together, copies of property titles, bank statements, and what looked like a private investigator's report with another man's name on it. I started reading, and with each line, my understanding of the past year shifted. Dad wrote about health scares he'd had before the heart failure that finally took him. He wrote about worrying what would happen to Mom and me if he wasn't around, and about noticing how vulnerable my mom was when it came to trust. He wrote about a man he'd heard about through an old acquaintance, someone who liked to help widows with their finances, and somehow always ended up in control of their assets. My hands shook harder when I saw the name printed on the investigator's report. Leonard Craig. There were old addresses, court references, and phrases like accusations of financial misconduct and settled out of court. A recent photo was paper-clipped to the front. It was definitely him, just with less gray in his hair. The rest of the envelope held copies of Dad's will, with handwritten notes in the margins, and one more document that made my breath catch. A notarized letter stating that the warehouse and all of its contents were legally under my name, not my mother's, effective immediately after his death. He'd written in the margin, "This is not because I love your mother less. It's because I'm afraid she will trust the wrong person. If she ever brings a man like the one I heard about into your lives, you must be the one holding the key." By the time I finished reading, my cheeks were wet. I pressed the letter to my chest, both furious and grateful. How long had he been carrying this fear alone? How close had we come to losing everything without even knowing it? I put the documents back carefully, but not into the safe. Instead, I slid them into my backpack, along with the metal box with my name on it, which I hadn't even opened yet. I locked up the warehouse and walked home with my heart pounding, feeling like every step I took was echoing louder than usual. There was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to tell my mom about any of this. Not yet. She was already half-wrapped in Leonard's gentle voice and helpful spreadsheets. If I told her what Dad had found, she'd either refuse to believe it or run straight to Leonard, and the evidence would mysteriously disappear. So I made a quiet promise to my dad and to myself as I zipped my backpack shut that night. I would keep what he'd hidden safe until the day I truly needed it. I just didn't realize then how ugly things would have to get before that day finally came. As Leonard's presence grew, my world shrank. It started with how he talked to me in private versus in front of my mom. When it was just the two of us, he dropped the polite tone completely. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and he was already there, leaning against the counter, scrolling on his phone. He looked up at me with that cool, appraising stare I'd come to hate. "You went to the warehouse today," he said, not asking, just stating it. I froze for half a second. Yeah. I needed to check on some things. "What things?" he asked. "Inventory. Or something else?" I shrugged, trying to act casual. "Just checking for water leaks and dust. The usual." He smiled without warmth. "Funny, because I drove past there yesterday and noticed the lights were on. You should be more careful, Natalie. People might think you're hiding something." My jaw clenched. "There's nothing illegal going on, if that's what you're implying." "Illegal," he repeated slowly, as if testing how the word felt in the air. "No, I'm sure there isn't. You don't seem smart enough for that level of planning." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "But you do seem stubborn enough to sabotage your own mother's future just to hold on to a pile of boxes." Before I could answer, my mom walked in. Leonard instantly shifted, his shoulders relaxing, voice turning soft. "We were just talking about how stressful it must be for Natalie to feel responsible for the warehouse," he said. "Maybe we should relieve some of that pressure from her." My mom looked at me with concern. "Honey, are you okay? Leonard says you're under a lot of strain, trying to handle everything." It was like that all the time. Whenever I tried to tell her that he was pushing me, cornering me with words when she wasn't around, he'd tilt his head and say, "Why would I do that, Diane? She must have misunderstood." "Maybe you're just being a bit sensitive," my mom would say gently. "He's trying to help." That's how gaslighting works. You start wondering if maybe you are the crazy one, because everyone else seems to be reading from a different script. He also slowly cut me off from people who might have taken my side. He told my aunt over the phone that I was not handling grief well, and acting out. He commented to a neighbor that I seemed obsessed with the warehouse and refused to listen to reason. I overheard him telling my mom's friend at the door, "I worry about her sometimes. She's so attached to that building, it's like she prefers it to human company." Soon, invitations to family dinners started going only to Diane and Leonard. When I showed up to my cousin's birthday, I caught the strained smiles, the quick glances. My aunt pulled me aside and whispered, "Maybe be kinder to Leonard. He's trying to step up as a father figure." I wanted to scream that my father didn't need replacing, that Leonard was only trying to step up to my dad's wallet, not his role. Instead, I just smiled weakly and said I'd try. At home, new rules appeared without anyone calling them rules. Leonard started keeping the car keys in his jacket pocket instead of on the hook by the door. When I asked to borrow the car to go to the warehouse one evening, he said, "It's too late, and it's not safe over there at night. Besides, there's nothing urgent you need to do there. If it's not safe, why do you get to go whenever you want?" I asked. He sighed like he was dealing with a child. "Because I know how to handle risky situations. You don't. And honestly, Natalie, the more you fight me on this, the more you prove you're not ready for adult responsibilities." Even my phone felt less safe. One afternoon, I left it on the coffee table while I went to the bathroom. When I came back, it was face down in a slightly different spot, and the notification I'd seen on the lock screen before, an email from a lawyer's office about documents belonging to Paul Miller, was gone. I checked the email app. The message was still there, but now marked as read. I hadn't opened it yet. "Natalie, are you okay?" my mom asked, seeing my expression. "Did you look at my phone?" I asked Leonard directly. He blinked, all innocence. "Why would I go through your phone? You've really got to stop imagining things." My mom frowned, giving me that "you're overreacting" look again, and I felt my throat close up. By then, I was starting to feel like a guest in my own life. The house didn't feel like home. It felt like a stage where Leonard performed kindness in front of my mom and cruelty when no one was watching. The only place that still felt like mine was the warehouse. And even that, he was circling like a vulture. One night, I walked past my mom's bedroom and heard them talking in low voices. "I just worry she's going to ruin herself," Leonard was saying. "She refuses to let go of that building. It's not healthy." "But it was her father's," my mom whispered. "And I respect that," he said smoothly. "But love sometimes means making hard choices for someone when they're not capable of making them for themselves." My heart hammered against my ribs. I realized that they weren't just talking about the warehouse anymore. They were talking about taking decisions away from me entirely. I went to my room, closed the door, and took my backpack out from under the bed, checking for the 10th time that Dad's letters and documents were still there. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay there listening to the new soft snoring in my mom's bed down the hall and thought about how Leonard had invaded every part of our house. But he still didn't have the one thing he wanted most: complete control of what my dad had left behind. I knew it was only a matter of time before he tried something more official. The official something came a few weeks later, disguised as a family meeting. I came home from my shift at the cafe and found my mom sitting stiffly on the sofa, hands clasped in her lap. Leonard was standing by the window in a pressed shirt, and another man I'd never seen before was sitting in Dad's old armchair, a leather briefcase at his feet. The atmosphere felt thick, like the air before a storm. "What's going on?" I asked, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. Leonard turned, his voice warm but his eyes cool. "Natalie, good. We've been waiting for you. This is Mr. Reed, an attorney I know. He's here to help us sort out some things regarding the warehouse and other assets." My mom gave me a small, nervous smile. "Just sit down, honey. We're just going to talk." I stayed standing. "Talk about what?" Mr. Reed adjusted his glasses. "Your mother and Leonard have expressed concern about the financial burden of maintaining the warehouse. They'd like to propose a restructuring of responsibilities." Leonard gestured to the coffee table, where a stack of papers sat neatly arranged. "We've prepared an agreement that would take the weight off your shoulders, Natalie," he said. "I'd step in as the primary manager of the warehouse, make decisions about selling, leasing, or repurposing it. You'd be relieved of the stress." My stomach dropped. "So basically, you want me to sign it over to you," I said flatly. "It's not about me," he replied with a sigh. It's about what's best for your mother. She's not young, Natalie. She can't handle uncertainty forever. My mom winced. Leonard, she murmured, but she didn't tell him to stop. I picked up the top page and quickly scanned it. Even with my limited legal knowledge, I could see what it really was. A transfer of management rights, giving Leonard the authority to sell or encumber the warehouse in the best interest of the household. My name appeared only in the context of former informal custodian. It was like they were erasing me in ink. I'm not signing this, I said, dropping the paper back onto the stack. Leonard's jaw tightened. Natalie, don't be dramatic. This is an opportunity to move on. You don't even know what half of what's in that building is worth. I know enough to know that it's not yours, I snapped. Dad left things in order. He didn't leave some random fiancé in charge of his life's work. Mr. Reed cleared his throat. To be fair, your father's will is somewhat vague on operational control, he said carefully. However, your mother is your primary surviving parent, and Leonard will soon be her husband. It's natural for him to be involved in these matters. So now we're pretending I don't exist unless you need my signature? I asked. My mom suddenly stood up, tears in her eyes. Natalie, please, she said. We're drowning. The taxes, the bills, the calls from companies I don't even understand. I can't do this. Leonard is trying to help. Why are you making everything harder? Her voice broke on the last word, and guilt washed over me even though I knew, deep down, I was the only one in the room actually protecting what my dad had left. Leonard stepped closer, his expression turning colder. You're being selfish, he said quietly. You're a grown woman living in your mother's house, contributing almost nothing, hoarding a useless building because you like playing caretaker to a graveyard of boxes. He leaned in, his voice low enough that only I could hear the next part. If you had any respect for your mother, you'd hand over that dusty warehouse to me and stop clinging to your dead father's leftovers. I felt like someone had slapped me. The words were almost identical to what he'd said that night at dinner, but this time there was no Jenna, no whine, no half-polite tone. Just raw entitlement and a warning. Sign, or I'll make your life unlivable. I respect my mother enough not to hand her future to a man she's known for less than a year, I said, my voice shaking. I'm not signing anything today. Mr. Reed shifted, closing his briefcase with a soft click that sounded like disappointment. Natalie, maybe you'd like some time to think it over, he suggested. But I do advise resolving this before any major life changes, such as a marriage. Leonard's eyes flicked to him, and then back to me. You're making a big mistake, he said. Do you really think you can keep living here while you fight us at every step? I swallowed hard. If that's what you're threatening, then no. I'll find my own place. My mom gasped. Natalie, no, that's not. Leonard cut in smoothly. If you're not willing to cooperate on this, maybe some distance is exactly what we all need. We can't keep walking on eggshells around your grief. He turned to my mom. We'll help her with first month's rent somewhere small. It'll give her time to think. Maybe a wake-up call is what she needs. I looked at my mom, hoping she'd say no, that she'd tell him to stop, to sit down, to remember I was her daughter, not a line item. But she just looked torn and exhausted, tears running down her face. I don't want you to go, she whispered. But I can't live like this, Natalie. Every conversation turns into a fight. It hurt so much I almost couldn't breathe. I get it, I said hoarsely. I'll pack some things. I went to my room and closed the door behind me, pressing my forehead against it for a long moment before I forced myself to move. I stuffed clothes into a suitcase with numb hands, grabbed my work shoes, my phone charger, a few books. Then I reached under my bed and pulled out my backpack, the one thing I refused to leave behind. Inside it were my dad's letters, the documents he'd hidden in the warehouse safe, and the small metal box with my name on it that I still hadn't opened, too scared of what else I might find. Before I walked out, I unzipped the backpack and pulled out the letter once more. Near the bottom, in smaller handwriting, there was a line I'd skimmed over in my panic the first time. If a man like the one I'm afraid of ever tries to take control, do not fight him empty-handed. Talk to the people whose names I've listed in the box. They know more than your mother does, and they owe me favors. I stared at those words, my heart pounding. I realized then that whatever was inside that metal box wasn't just more paper. It was the path to turning this whole situation around, if I was brave enough to follow it. I zipped my backpack, grabbed my suitcase, and walked past the living room, where Leonard was standing with his arms crossed and my mom was crying quietly into a tissue. Neither of them knew that the most dangerous thing in this war over my dad's legacy was leaving the house with me. And neither of them had any idea that, one day, everything he'd been so desperate to control would be laid out in front of strangers who had the power to take everything back from him. I stepped out into the cool evening air and closed the door behind me. For the first time, I felt completely alone. But I also felt something else, buried deep under the fear and heartbreak. The first tiny spark of determination that would, eventually, burn his carefully built lies to the ground. After my dad died, my mom fell under the influence of Leonard, a charming asset manager, who started pushing to control my dad's warehouse. I secretly found documents in the warehouse safe showing Dad had put the building under my name and had a private investigator dig into Leonard's shady past. When I refused to sign Leonard's papers, he and my mom let me move out, not knowing I took all of Dad's hidden evidence with me. I ended up in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, the kind of place where the washing machines hummed like a constant low anxiety in the background. The walls were thin, the paint was chipped, and the only view from my window was the alley behind a grocery store. But for the first time in months, I could close a door and know that Leonard wasn't on the other side of it, waiting to twist my words. The first night I slept there, I woke up 3 times in a panic, thinking I'd hear my mom's voice asking me to be nicer to him. It took a few seconds each time to remember. She wasn't there. No one was. Just me, a second-hand couch I'd bought off a listing, and my dad's backpack sitting on the coffee table like a silent guardian. I dragged the backpack onto my lap and finally pulled out the small metal box with my name on it. It was heavier than it looked, cold against my palms. For a while I just sat there, staring at it, feeling like opening it would make everything more real, that I couldn't pretend anymore that this was just a family disagreement that would pass if I apologized enough. Finally, I took a deep breath and opened the latch. Inside were 3 things. A folded sheet of paper with several names and phone numbers written in my dad's careful handwriting. A small flash drive. And a simple silver key with a red sticker on it. The paper had a heading at the top. People you can trust when I'm gone. Underneath were 3 names. Marcus Cole, accountant. Linda Walker, former client/friend. Attorney. Sandra Jenkins. Next to each name, my dad had scribbled short notes. For Marcus, helped me clean up a mess someone else made once. Solid, hates scammers. For Linda, good heart, went through something similar, understands manipulation. For Sandra, knows where everything really is. I swallowed hard. Dad hadn't just worried in abstract. He'd built a small safety net for me, person by person, while he was still alive. I picked up the silver key with the red sticker and turned it over in my fingers. On the back of the box lid, in small letters, he'd written, "Red key equals cabinet in warehouse office. Only open when you're not alone." The flash drive just had one word written on it in marker, backups. That word alone made my skin prickle. For a while, I just sat on the floor, my back against the couch, thinking. Part of me wanted to call my mom right then and tell her everything. The investigator's report, Leonard's past, the extra documents. But I could already hear her voice in my head. Leonard says there are 2 sides to every story. Leonard says you're misinterpreting things. Leonard says this is just your grief talking. No. If I went to her empty-handed, I'd lose. Dad's letter had been clear. Don't fight a man like Leonard without allies. So the next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called a stranger and asked them to help me take my life back. Marcus Cole's office was on the third floor of an old brick building downtown, above a bakery that smelled like fresh bread and coffee. The waiting room was small but tidy, with framed certificates on the wall and a potted plant that looked too healthy to be real. I sat on one of the chairs, gripping my backpack, going over what I'd say in my head. When the door finally opened, a man in his late 50s stepped out. He was tall, with kind eyes behind simple glasses and a shirt that looked like it had been ironed hours ago. "Natalie?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, standing up. "You're Marcus." He nodded. "Come on in. Your father talked about you a lot." That made my throat tighten immediately. I followed him into his office, which was lined with shelves of neatly labeled binders and file boxes. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Your dad left a note with my receptionist a long time ago," he said as we sat a day, "said that if his daughter ever called, I should make time for her, no matter what my schedule looked like." Tears stung my eyes. "He really thought of everything, didn't he?" I mumbled. Marcus gave a half smile. "He tried. He came to me a while before he passed. He was worried someone might take advantage of your mother if he wasn't around. He didn't say who, just that he'd heard things about a certain type of man. So, why don't you tell me what's happened since he's been gone?" The words spilled out of me like water from a broken faucet. I told him about my mom's grief, about Leonard showing up with his perfect timing and asset management job, about the dinner where Leonard humiliated me over the warehouse, the family meeting with the attorney, the pressure to sign my rights away. I told him about the warehouse safe, the envelope, the investigator's report with Leonard's name on it, and the small box with the flash drive and list of contacts. Marcus listened without interrupting, only occasionally jotting notes on a pad. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a long breath. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," he said. "But I'm not. Your father suspected a specific man he'd heard rumors about. He didn't know the name, but the pattern matches what you're describing." He held out his hand. "Do you have the documents and the report with you?" I slid the investigator's report, the notarized letter about the warehouse, and copies of Dad's will across the desk. He put on his glasses and started going through them, humming under his breath. "Your father was smart," Marcus said after a while. "He made sure the warehouse is legally under your name. That means Leonard can't do anything to it without your involvement, no matter how much he pressures your mother. As for this investigator's report," he flipped a page. "These references to past complaints and settlements are serious. They may not have turned into criminal convictions, but they show a pattern." "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice small. "He's already turned my family against me. My mom thinks I'm selfish for not letting him help." Marcus set the papers down and looked at me steadily. "You don't fix something like this overnight," he said. "You build your position. First, we confirm everything your father did is legally solid. Then we talk to Sandra Jenkins. She's sharp, and your father trusted her. We gather copies of everything and make sure they're stored in more than one place. Only then do we consider confronting Leonard." The word confronting made my stomach twist. "In court?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe in a setting where he thinks he has the upper hand. Sometimes men like that dig their own holes when they think they're winning." He pushed the investigator's report back toward me and tapped the flash drive I'd placed on the desk. "And before we go any further," he added, "I want to see what's on this." The next few weeks were the strangest mix of rock bottom and new beginnings I'd ever experienced. My apartment was small and my bank account was thinner than I liked. But for the first time, I had a plan that didn't involve making myself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. In between shifts at the cafe, I met with Marcus and later, with Sandra Jenkins, the attorney from my dad's list. Sandra's office felt different from Mr. Reed's had in my living room. There were no forced smiles, no sly glances. She asked direct questions, listened carefully, and didn't once talk down to me. "Your father worked with me on his updated will and several backup arrangements," she explained, pulling a file from her cabinet with my dad's name on it. He was very particular about the warehouse. He wanted it to be your safety net, not a bargaining chip for anyone else. She showed me documents I'd never seen before. A version of the will that clearly listed the warehouse and its contents under my name. A clause that restricted any transfer of control unless I personally initiated it with independent counsel. And a signed letter that basically said, in legal language, that if my mother ever remarried, her new husband would have absolutely no claim over that property. I sat there blinking back tears. Why didn't he tell me all of this when he was alive? I whispered. Sandra's expression softened. He said he didn't want you to live your life expecting the worst from people. He hoped you'd never need any of this. She paused. But he also knew the world doesn't always care what we hope. Marcus had already checked the flash drive. On it were scanned copies of every major document, the investigators' full reports, and even email correspondence my dad had saved with someone warning him about a man who circles widows with assets. Everything my father had suspected, everything he'd done to prepare, was all there in digital form, ready to be duplicated, backed up, and placed in places Leonard would never be able to touch. With Marcus's help, I opened a small savings account under my own name, using money from a small insurance payout Dad had arranged specifically as a legal war chest for me. With Sandra's help, we filed some quiet paperwork that strengthened my legal ownership of the warehouse and registered a notice so that any attempt to change it without my signature would be flagged. Meanwhile, my day-to-day life started to settle into a new rhythm. I walked to work at the cafe in the mornings, learned how to stretch my paycheck across the month, and slowly got to know my neighbors. The woman who lived down the hall, Amy, was a single mom with a little boy who loved to race his toy cars in the hallway. One night, when she caught me staring blankly at an unopened letter from my mom, she knocked on my door with 2 paper cups of instant noodles. "You look like you need someone to listen," she said, handing me one. I surprised myself by telling her almost everything. About my dad, the warehouse, Leonard, moving out. She shook her head. "Men like that love women who are grieving," she said quietly. "They come in as saviors, and start cutting everyone else out." Hearing someone else say it so plainly made me feel less crazy. "So what are you going to do?" she asked. I looked at the metal key on my coffee table, the one with the red sticker, and the stack of neatly labeled folders Sandra had given me. "I'm going to stop reacting and start planning," I said. The words felt strange and powerful in my mouth. For the first time, my life wasn't just about holding on. It was about moving toward something. The day I'd stop being the girl everyone thought was too emotional, and start being the person who knew the truth, and could prove it. The next step was going back to the warehouse, but this time, I didn't go alone. Sandra insisted on it. "If your father said only open that cabinet when you're not alone, we respect that," she said. So one Saturday afternoon, she drove with me to the warehouse district, while Marcus met us there with a thermos of coffee and a folder under his arm. As we pulled up, the familiar corrugated metal walls and faded sign made my chest tighten. So many memories lived inside that building. Dad laughing as he lifted me onto a forklift. Him complaining about customs paperwork. Him sitting in his office late, rubbing his temples and saying, "This place will take care of you one day, kiddo." I unlocked the door, the metal groaning the same way it always had. The smell of dust and old cardboard hit me, comforting and heavy all at once. We walked past the rows of shelves until we reached Dad's office. I took out the silver key with the red sticker and looked around the room. There, on the far wall, was a tall metal cabinet I'd never seen unlocked before. It had a small keyhole exactly where Dad had once tapped his finger and said, "Some doors don't need to be opened until the right time." My hand shook a little as I slid the key in and turned it. The lock clicked, and the cabinet door creaked open. Inside were neatly labeled binders and boxes, each with dates and short descriptions. Inventory archives, client records, taxes, warehouse expenses, and then, near the bottom, personal protections. Sandra raised an eyebrow. "Your father wasn't subtle," she murmured. We pulled out the personal protections box and set it on the desk. Inside were physical copies of almost everything that had been on the flash drive. The investigators' reports. Notes on conversations Dad had had about Leonard-type schemes. Draft letters he'd written but never sent to warn a friend. And several photographs of documents that belonged to other people. Who are these? I asked, pointing at one picture showing a woman's name on a deed and then, on another page, that same property under Leonard's name. Marcus's mouth tightened. Those are from one of his prior messes, he said. A widow who almost lost her house because she trusted the wrong man. Your father helped me dig into it years ago. We kept it in case anyone ever needed to prove there was a pattern. We also found something else. A copy of an email that had been sent to my father from an address I didn't recognize, signed by someone named Linda Walker. I unfolded the printed email and read, Paul. Thank you for taking my story seriously when others said I was overreacting. If anything ever happens to you, and your family needs help, please give them my number. No woman should have to find out too late what we did. Sandra tapped the folder gently. With all this, Leonard isn't just some annoying stepfather, she said. He's a man with a history your father documented very carefully. If he tries to push you again, you won't be walking into that conversation empty-handed. I swallowed. But he already has my mom on his side, I said. Every time I tried to talk to her, he made me sound unstable. What if she still chooses him over the truth? Sandra looked me straight in the eye. Then we won't just show the truth to her, she said. We'll show it to people who have the power to act on it. That's when Marcus pulled a thin folder from his bag and laid it on the desk. I've been quietly looking into Leonard's current situation, he said. Through public records, professional networks, and a couple of old contacts. He's already been circling 2 other widows in the past few years. One of them, funny enough, is a woman your father once helped. He opened the folder to a photo of a woman in her 40s standing in front of a small house, smiling awkwardly at the camera. Her name, printed neatly at the bottom, made me blink. Linda Walker. She'd like to talk to you, Marcus said. She remembers your father well. Meeting Linda felt like meeting a version of my future that someone else had barely escaped from. We sat across from each other at a small cafe on the edge of town. She had soft eyes, tired but kind, and a way of holding her coffee cup like she was grounding herself with the warmth. I'm so sorry you're going through this, she said after I told her the basics of my situation. When your father first helped me, I was in your mother's shoes. Lost my husband, couldn't breathe without feeling guilty for still being alive. She told me her story in a calm, steady voice that still managed to make my skin crawl. How she'd met Leonard at a financial seminar, how he'd offered to help her make sense of her late husband's business. How he'd slowly painted her son as ungrateful and reckless, turning them against each other until she signed over control of several properties in the interest of efficiency. How, by the time she realized what had happened, the properties were heavily leveraged and almost lost. Your father stepped in when he saw me crying in the bank, she said, eyes shining. He didn't owe me anything. He just couldn't stand watching another person be used. She smiled sadly. He dug into Leonard's paperwork, noticed patterns, got me in touch with Marcus. We didn't get everything back, but we stopped Leonard from taking it all. He moved on to another city after that. I always knew he'd pop up somewhere else. I felt both sick and strangely vindicated. So he's doing the same thing again, I said. This time with my mother, and my father's warehouse. Linda nodded. Men like that don't retire. They just look for the next person who's hurting enough to be blind. Marcus, who'd come with me, leaned forward. We're not going to let it happen, he said. But we need a controlled way to reveal everything so he can't twist the story. Sandra had already been working on that. When I met with her later that week, she laid out the beginnings of a plan. We'd invite my mother and Leonard to a meeting at her office, near the warehouse district, under the pretense that I was finally ready to talk about the warehouse and sign some documents. We'd have copies of all the relevant papers ready. We'd also have Marcus there, and if she agreed, Linda as well, not as a surprise attack, but as a living example of what Leonard really did to people. If he thinks this is just a small family chat, he'll be relaxed enough to talk, Sandra said. Men like him love the sound of their own voices when they think they're winning. I swallowed. And my mom. Sandra sighed. We can't control how she reacts. But we can control what she hears and who else hears it with her. That night, back in my apartment, I stared at my phone for a long time before finally typing a message to my mom. Mom. I've been thinking a lot. I know we haven't talked much since I moved out, and that hurts me more than you know. I don't want us to stay like this. I found someone who can help us understand Dad's will and the warehouse better. Someone who worked with him directly. Could you and Leonard come to a meeting at her office next week? I promise I'm coming with an open mind. It wasn't the full truth, but it wasn't a lie either. I waited, my heart thumping in my ears, until my camera roll was the only thing left to scroll through. An hour later, her reply came. If you are really ready to talk calmly and stop fighting, then yes. Leonard says it's a good sign that you're reaching out. Send me the address. I read that last line twice, the part where she mentioned him before herself. For a second, anger flared in my chest. Then it cooled into something clearer. Resolve. Fine. If she trusted him that much, she'd have to see him as he really was. With witnesses, with documents, with people who had nothing to gain from lying. Dad hadn't built all these protections for nothing. It was time to use them. The day of the meeting, the sky was overcast, the air heavy with a kind of thick gray that made everything feel slower. Sandra's office was in a renovated brick building a few streets over from the warehouse district, where you could see the tops of the corrugated rooftops from the windows. The waiting area was already busy, the muffled sounds of other clients and staff moving around adding to the tension buzzing in my chest. I arrived early, holding a folder of my own, Dad's letter, the notarized documents, the investigator's report. Sandra and Marcus were already there, going over some last-minute details in her office. Marcus looked up as I walked in. You okay? He asked. No, I said honestly. But I'm here. Sandra gave a small approving nod. Remember, she said, you're not the one on trial today. You're the one your father trusted most. 10 minutes before the scheduled time, Linda arrived. Her hands folded around the strap of her purse. I can still back out if you want me to, she said nervously. I shook my head. No. I want my mom to see a real person, not just paper. Then, right on time, the receptionist buzzed Sandra. Your 2 o'clock is here, she said. A Diane Miller and a Mr. Leonard Craig. My heart almost stopped at hearing his last name spoken so neutrally in that professional tone. Sandra looked at me. Ready. I wiped my palms on my skirt and nodded. When they walked into the meeting room, my mom looked smaller than I remembered, like the months of tension had shrunk her. Leonard, on the other hand, looked crisp and composed, wearing a tailored jacket and the kind of confident half-smile that said he felt firmly in control. Natalie, my mom breathed, eyes filling with tears. You look thinner. Are you eating enough? I smiled weakly. I'm okay, Mom. Leonard gave me a polite nod. Thank you for arranging this, he said. It's good to see you're ready to be practical. His gaze slid past me as he took in Sandra and Marcus, then paused on Linda, who sat quietly at the end of the table. For a brief second, something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe recognition, but it vanished almost instantly. He pulled out a chair for my mother and then sat beside her, his hand resting possessively on the table between them. Sandra introduced herself and Marcus in her professional tone. Your husband, Paul, worked closely with us on his estate planning, she explained to my mom. He also left specific instructions in case there was ever confusion about the warehouse and other assets. My mom looked startled. He never told me all that, she said softly. Sometimes people prepare for worst-case scenarios without wanting to scare the people they love, Sandra said gently. Leonard cleared his throat. With all due respect, our main concern is that the warehouse has become a point of tension, he said smoothly. Natalie's emotional attachment is understandable, but it's been preventing us from making sensible decisions. I'm hoping we can find a way today to resolve that. Sandra nodded, her expression neutral. Absolutely, she said. Let's talk about what the law actually says first. Then we can talk about feelings. She laid out copies of my father's updated will, the notarized letter about the warehouse, and the registration notices she'd filed. As she spoke, I watched my mom's face shift from confusion to surprise to something like guilt. According to your husband's instructions, Sandra said, the warehouse and its contents were placed under Natalie's sole legal ownership upon his passing. This was not a symbolic decision. It was a deliberate measure to ensure that if you ever found yourself in a vulnerable position, there would be at least one asset no one could pressure you into giving away. My mom glanced at Leonard, startled. He didn't tell me that, she whispered. Leonard's smile thinned. I'm sure there are many things Paul didn't tell you, he said lightly. Honestly, I find it odd that such a decision was made without consulting the primary surviving spouse. He turned to Sandra. Isn't it possible there are other documents that override this? Ones Natalie might not know about. Sandra calmly slid another document forward. This is the version filed with my office, signed and witnessed, she said. It's already been confirmed with the appropriate records. There's no override. In fact, there's an additional clause that specifically prevents any spouse or future spouse from gaining control of the warehouse without Natalie's independent consent. For the first time since arriving, Leonard's composure wavered. His fingers curled tighter around the edge of the table. So that's how it is, he said. He didn't trust his own wife. My mom flinched, hurt. Sandra's voice softened. He trusted his wife's heart, she said. He didn't trust the world she might have to walk through without him. There was a heavy silence. Then Leonard leaned back, forcing a chuckle. Well, that's unfortunate, he said. But at the end of the day, this is still a family matter. I'm here to help Diane manage her life. There's no need to drag in outsiders or turn this into something ugly. We can work something out. Perhaps Natalie could assign me temporary management in exchange for... That brings us to the next point, Marcus interrupted smoothly, something steely in his usually calm voice. He opened his folder and laid out the investigator's report my father had commissioned, the one with Leonard's name all over it. And what's this? Leonard asked, though his eyes had already narrowed. This, Marcus said, is a report your late husband requested from a private investigator. He was concerned about patterns he'd seen involving widows and their finances. He didn't know who might come into his wife's life one day, but he wanted the facts about a certain type of man. He flipped to the page with Leonard's photo, the one showing him younger, standing outside a building that looked like a courthouse. The same face, the same eyes, just fewer gray hairs. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. What is that? She whispered. Sandra's voice stayed even. It's a record of past allegations, settlements, and asset transfers involving Mr. Leonard Craig, she said. No criminal convictions, but multiple reports from women in situations very similar to yours. Recent widows with property and confusion about their late husband's businesses. Leonard laughed, but it came out tight. Old accusations, he said. People lie, you know. Especially when they regret their own choices. Anyone can print a report like that. That's why we brought someone who can speak for herself, Marcus replied. He turned to Linda, who had been sitting quietly, hands folded. Linda. Leonard's head snapped toward her. For the first time, real recognition flashed openly across his face. You, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Linda met his gaze calmly, though I could see her fingers trembling slightly against her purse. Yes, she said. Me. My mom looked back and forth between them. Do you know each other? She asked. Linda took a deep breath. Leonard and I worked together after my husband died, she said quietly. He helped me manage my finances. I trusted him. He convinced me that my son was irresponsible, that I needed to keep him away from decisions. Within a year, I had almost signed away my house and 2 rental properties he said he was streamlining for me. She looked at my mother directly. If your daughter's father hadn't stepped in and helped me get proper advice, I would have lost everything. Leonard would have walked away clean, and I would have been blamed for being naive. My mom turned to Leonard, eyes wide, tears forming. Is that true? She whispered. He threw his hands up, voice rising. Oh, come on, he snapped. This is exactly what I was warning you about. People twisting things, making me the villain because they can't own their own mistakes. I gave her advice, and she ignored half of it. Then her son came in and stirred drama and... Enough, Sandra said sharply. Her voice cut through the room like a clean blade. This is not about drama. This is about patterns. You attempted to pressure Natalie into signing away control of an asset that her father deliberately placed in her name. You spoke about her to relatives and neighbors as if she were unstable, to isolate her. You held private budget talks with her grieving mother and brought in an attorney on your side to frame a legal trap in her own living room. He glared at her. You don't know what you're talking about. Sandra slid another paper across the table. This is a notice we filed stating that any attempt to use Natalie's name or forge her consent regarding the warehouse will be treated as fraud and reported immediately, she said. We've also taken the liberty of backing up all documentation and correspondence your late husband collected, including copies of your prior asset management arrangements. If necessary, we will be sharing this with the proper authorities and any future partners you might try to approach. The blood drained from Leonard's face. For the first time, I saw real fear, not just annoyance. You can't do that, he said, his voice cracking. You have no right to dig into my past. This is a private matter. It stopped being private when you targeted multiple vulnerable families, Marcus said quietly. And when you tried to manipulate a grieving widow into handing you control of property you had no claim to, Sandra added. My mom was shaking now, her eyes glued to the pages in front of her. Natalie, she whispered, turning to me. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep this to yourself? I swallowed, my own voice trembling. Because every time I tried to tell you something was wrong, he convinced you I was being emotional, I said. I didn't want to come to you with just feelings. Dad didn't leave the warehouse to me because he didn't trust you, Mom. He left it to me because he knew the world would see you as an easy target when he was gone. He wanted at least one thing in our lives completely out of reach for men like him. I looked straight at Leonard as I said that last word. He slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. You're twisting everything, he snapped. You brought strangers here to gang up on me. This is what I've been dealing with, Diane, a daughter who can't move on, who's paranoid and jealous of anyone who tries to help you. He turned to my mom, his voice dropping into that wounded tone he used so well. I have been there for you, he said. Where were all these people when you were crying at night? When the bills were piling up? Your husband wrote secret letters and hid documents from you. Your daughter hid them too. And now they want to paint me as the monster. For a second, I saw my mom waver. Her eyes filled with more tears, her face crumpling. Leonard's words always seemed to find the softest parts of her and press down. But before she could answer, Linda spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. That's exactly what he said to me, she told my mother. Word for word. He said my son didn't care, that he was the only one who truly understood me. He used my loneliness as proof that I should hand him everything. If you walk out of here with him today, he'll keep doing this until there's nothing left with your name on it. Silence filled the room, heavy and trembling. My mom looked from Linda, to Marcus, to Sandra, to me, then finally back to Leonard. Is any of this true? She asked him, her voice barely a whisper. His mask slipped completely. You're really going to listen to them over me, he snapped. All I've done is try to fix the mess your husband left behind. He didn't take care of you properly, he didn't prepare you. That's enough, she said, and suddenly her voice was stronger. The tears were still there, but something in her posture shifted. Don't you dare talk about Paul that way. Leonard blinked, thrown off. Diane. My husband did prepare, she said. Maybe he didn't tell me everything, but he thought about our future. He trusted our daughter. He trusted these people. She reached for one of the documents, her fingers brushing the familiar signature at the bottom. I didn't know you, Leonard, when Paul went to all this trouble, she said, her voice breaking. But he knew someone like you existed. The room stayed completely still. Outside, I could hear faint office noise, phones ringing, distant footsteps, but inside, everything revolved around her next breath. I need you to leave, my mom said finally. Slowly, clearly. I need time to think, and I can't do that with you in my ear. You don't speak for me. And you will never speak for my daughter again. Leonard stared at her like he didn't recognize her. Then his gaze snapped to me, flooded with anger. You did this, he said. You've always been the problem. I warned her about you. You'll ruin her. Sandra folded her hands on the table. Mr. Craig, she said coolly, this meeting is over for you. Any further contact with my client Diane, regarding her assets or her late husband's accounts, will go through my office from now on. You are not to speak to Natalie about the warehouse or attempt to access it in any way. We already have security measures in place, and everything that has been said and shown here today has been documented. He looked like he wanted to argue, to slam his hand again, to twist reality one more time. But he also looked at the pile of papers, at Linda's steady gaze, at Marcus's calm certainty, at Sandra's professional steel, and realized for once that he wasn't in a living room he could control. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. This isn't over, he hissed. Then he yanked open the door and walked out, his steps echoing down the hallway. The moment the door closed, my mom's shoulders sagged, and she let out a sob that sounded like it had been trapped inside her for months. I moved without thinking, pulling my chair closer and wrapping my arms around her. I'm so sorry, she cried into my shoulder. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I was so tired of being scared. He made everything sound so simple. I stroked her back, tears finally spilling over my own cheeks. I know, Mom, I whispered. That's what people like him do. Dad knew it. That's why he left us more than just furniture and stock in a warehouse. The months after that meeting weren't magically easy, but they finally moved in the right direction. Leonard tried to call my mom a few times, leaving voicemails where he flipped between begging and blaming. Sandra advised her not to respond, documenting everything in case it ever escalated into something more serious. Eventually, the calls slowed, then stopped. He also tried one more thing. An inquiry at the local records office about correcting an ownership mistake on the warehouse. But because of the notices Sandra had filed, his request triggered an automatic alert. By the time anyone called, we already had all the paperwork in place to shut it down. He didn't come back to our house. Word about what happened in that attorney's office spread quietly through the small network of people Dad had once helped and those Marcus still worked with. In a community like ours, reputations can be built slowly and destroyed even slower, but they can be turned cold. By the end of the year, most of the people he liked to impress with his polished stories knew enough not to trust him with their money or their widowed relatives. My relationship with my mom didn't fix itself overnight. There were awkward conversations, tears, and moments where she'd suddenly apologize for something small and then start crying over how blind she'd been. I tried not to turn my pain into punishment. I reminded myself that if Leonard could manipulate people like Linda and my mom, it wasn't because they were stupid, it was because they were hurting. We started meeting at the warehouse sometimes. Just the two of us. At first, it was just to walk around and remember Dad. She'd touch a stack of boxes and say, he used to complain that supplier never delivered on time, and I'd laugh and tell her about the time he nearly fell off a pallet trying to fix a blinking light. One afternoon, we sat in his old office, looking at the metal cabinet I'd unlocked with the red key. You really feel safe here, she said, watching me. I nodded. It's the one place no one could twist away from us, I said. Dad made sure of that. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and took my hand. Maybe we can make it more than just old boxes and memories, she said. Maybe we can actually use this place for something that helps us live, not just survive. It was a simple sentence, but it lit something inside me. Over the next few months, we did exactly that. With Marcus's help, we sorted through the inventory and sold what made sense. We used part of the proceeds to fix up half the warehouse as a rental storage space and a small logistics hub for local businesses, something my dad had once talked about doing one day. I took some online courses in basic business management and, slowly, started to feel less like a girl fighting everyone and more like a woman who actually knew what she was doing. We hired a couple of part-time workers, including Amy's teenage son, who needed extra cash and turned out to be surprisingly good with inventory software. My mom helped with paperwork and client communication at first, then started bringing coffee and snacks like she used to do for my dad. Sometimes, as we locked up at night, she'd look around and whisper, "He would have loved seeing this place alive again." I still lived in my little apartment for a while, even after my mom offered to have me move back. "You have your own life now," she said one evening as we sat on the warehouse steps, watching the sunset reflect off the metal roofs. "You're not just my daughter anymore. You're my partner." Eventually, we found a different rhythm. I spent some nights at the old house, some at my apartment, and we gave each other space without giving Leonard any more room between us. As for the documents and evidence my father had collected, we didn't lock them away and forget them. Sandra helped us organize them into secure, backed-up files. If there was one thing we all agreed on, it was this. Men like Leonard thrived in the dark. We weren't going to let his pattern continue just because we had gotten away. Sometimes, on quieter days, I still thought about calling him, about yelling, about telling him exactly how close he'd come to stealing my father's legacy. But then I'd walk through the warehouse, past the labeled shelves and neatly stacked boxes, and remember that the best revenge wasn't screaming. It was thriving in the very place he'd tried to take. One evening, I stood in the middle of the warehouse office, Dad's old chair behind me, the metal cabinet closed and locked again. My mom was in the other room making tea for us. The lights buzzed softly overhead, and the air smelled like dust and possibility. I thought back to the night Leonard sneered that I was clinging to my dead father's leftovers. If he could see the place now, the contracts on the desk, the paid invoices, the small team laughing as they closed up for the day, he'd know exactly how wrong he'd been. This wasn't leftovers. This was the foundation of a life he would never control. Now I know why my dad guarded this warehouse so fiercely. It wasn't just about the goods or the rent he collected. It was about giving us something solid to stand on when the world tried to convince us we were helpless. And the secret I never told my mom until it was absolutely necessary? It wasn't just what was hidden in Dad's warehouse. It was the part of me he built there. The part that refused to hand over the key, no matter how many times someone tried to convince me I didn't deserve to hold it. From everything I went through, I learned that protecting the people you love sometimes means standing up to them when they're too hurt to see they're being used. Now I realize that we should never hand over our future to someone just because they speak confidently and arrive when we're at our weakest. If you're in a situation like mine back then, please remember, your instincts and your proof are worth more than anyone else's polished speeches. If you've ever gone through something similar or you want to share your own story, write it in the comments below. Don't forget to share this story with your friends, like the video, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories.